Hello students, today let us start with the next course of your skill enhancement course BA2SEC-2. We are done with creative writing and now I would like to start with translation studies and principles of translation. When we had started the classes online, of course, we had started in the beginning, then I had shared with you a very small video in which I discussed with you that what translation is. I wonder how many of you have seen that. Now, basically, to understand the translation studies and the principles of translation, first of all, we need to know what basically translation is all about. Previously, I had told you that to translate, when we translate things, we maintain the context. Context जिसको हम हिंदी में भाव कहते हैं, ठीक है? तो जो भाव होता है सेंटेंस में, हम उसको मेंटेन करते हैं. अब अगर मैं आपको एक ट्रांसलेशन देती हूँ, एक वर्ड देती हूँ या लाइन, अगर हम एक सेंटेंस डिस्कस करें, सिक्का घिसते घिसते घिस गया, ठीक है? तो आप इसको लिटरली चेंज नहीं कर पाओगे, है ना? सिक्का घिसते घिसते घिस गया. इसकी एक अच्छी ट्रांसलेशन क्या होगी? द कॉइन withered with the passage of time. ये इसकी एक अच्छी ट्रांसलेशन हो सकती है. अब अगर हिंदी में हम कहते हैं कि कल दो होते हैं, लिटरल ट्रांसलेशन नहीं पॉसिबल है ना. In English, there is a today and there is a tomorrow. Now, what is the difference that word to word translation is not a good translation or a correct translation? Because the script of the languages, script जिसको हम लिपि कहते हैं, इंग्लिश की रोमन है एंड हिंदी की देवनागरी है. ओके तो इसमें जो लेक्सिकोग्राफर है, जो वोकैबुलरी है, जो लिंग्विस्टिक्स है, दोनों ही लैंग्वेज के जो दोनों की स्क्रिप्ट है, दैट इज आउटराइटली डिफरेंट. सो लिटरल ट्रांसलेशन इज नॉट ऑलवेज द best translation. So what a translator always tries to do is maintain the context, the bhav. Okay, that is what a translator always keeps in mind. My guide and philosopher, he shared with us a very good example of translation. You know, उन्होंने हमें बताया एक नॉवल है, मित्रों मरजानी, पंजाबी नॉवल है, and you will also find it surprising that it was translated by a South Indian writer. He translated मित्रों मरजानी. अब पंजाबीज की बात करें, पंजाबी लिटरेचर की बात करें या पंजाबी लैंग्वेज एज सच हम बात करें, दैट मित्रों मरजानी टाइटल में ही गाली है, मरजानी इज गाली ओनली, है ना. And the whole novel is full of popular helping verbs which which is used in Punjab. Okay, gali comes naturally, right? अब उस साउथ इंडियन के लिए वो सारी चीज़ें समझना, एक छोटा सा एग्जाम्पल सर हमें देते थे कि उसमें एक लाइन थी, मैं चूल्हे पे जा रही हूँ, ठीक है, मैं चूल्हे पे जा रही हूँ, विच मीन्स कि मैं किचन में काम करने जा रही हूँ. नाउ मैं चूल्हे पे जा रही हाँ इन इटसेल्फ इज समथिंग difficult to be translated. So what a translator keeps in mind is the context, because what he has to maintain is the bhav, of course. At the same time, he has to maintain the meaning of what is being conveyed. आपको ऑब्वियसली नॉर्मल ट्रांसलेशन भी आएंगे, पैसेजेस आएंगे आपको ट्रांसलेशन के, वो मैंने आपको करवा दिए हैं. वी वर प्रैक्टिसिंग दैट, आई वाज गिविंग यू दैट फॉर प्रैक्टिस. But now we come to the theory part. So this was how and why translation is come up as another area of literature. और एक चीज़ सोचिए आप, अगर ट्रांसलेशंस ना हो तो आप जो राइटर्स दूसरी लैंग्वेज में लिखते हैं उनके बारे में आप कैसे पढ़ेंगे, या आप अगर हिंदी में लिख रहे हैं and if you want that people around the world should study your works, you are writing folk tales, you are writing stories, and if you want the people around the world should read your work, then what will help you? Translation will help you. Okay, so there is this etymology, पहले भी बताई थी मैंने आपको, है ना? Etymology of the word translation. And what is that? It is made from two words, Latin words, trans and Latin, which means carrying across. Okay, and these are Latin words from which translation word has been made. T-O-T-O-T-U. Right? So let us see what it is. The word translation is made up of two words, trans and Latin. The former Latin word means across or beyond, and the latter means carrying or borne. Thus, translation is carrying across. Carrying across what? Carrying across literature from one place to another, carrying across news from one place to another, carrying across business from one place to another. Now, translation, he says, is as old as human civilization. How? Let us find out how translation was used. Since the dawn of civilization, beginning of civilization, we human beings have been using language to translate what? Our thoughts and our ideas. Right? We use a set of symbols that become a code of communication. सिर्फ भाषा ही नहीं है ना, जो लोग बोलते नहीं हैं, they use the symbols, they use the signs, they use codes to communicate. So, I repeat, we use a set of symbols or codes to communicate or transfer an idea or thought or a feeling to the person whom we address during an act of communication. If you go down south, obviously everybody understands English, but then if somebody who doesn't know English, who knows Hindi only, still through the use of through the language of signs and symbols, you will be able to communicate what you want to the, say for example, to your guide who doesn't know Hindi well, right? So here too we have translation. In this sense, we translate every day. The story of translation dates back to the 3rd millennium BC. The Babylon of Hammurabi's day, that is 2100 BC, was a polyglot city. What is a polyglot city? Where several languages are spoken and people know many languages. And much of the official business of the empire was made possible by writers who translated edicts into various languages. With the evolution of human society, we became more anxious to know about the thoughts and feelings of people in distant places, far off places. Hence, we use sets of symbols and codes to transfer the thoughts and ideas of people speaking a different language to our own language. This gave rise to translation. So, to communicate ourselves, why was translation used? Translation was used for communication. And this is how, for the process of communication, translation had its birth. So, the activity of translation has a long-standing tradition and has been widely practiced throughout history. But in our rapidly changing world, its role has become of paramount importance, very, very significant. Nowadays, as cultural exchanges have been widening, knowledge has been increasingly expanding, and international communication has been intensifying. So, with the help of translation. As a result, the phenomenon of translation has become fundamental. It has become very, very significant. Be it for scientific, medical, technological, commercial, legal, cultural, or literary purposes, today human communication depends heavily on translation, and consequently interest in the field is also growing. अगर मैं आपको लिटरेचर से ही एग्जांपल दूं, जैसे कि हमने पढ़ा ट्रांसलेशन स्टडीज, ठीक है, ट्रांसलेशन स्टडीज एक अपने में ही एक एरिया आ गया है इन विच पीपल आर डूइंग देयर रिसर्च, एंड for this research, what is happening? Translation is taking place. Folk tales of Himachal are being translated into Assamese language so that people over there can read those folk tales. Folk tales of Assam are translated into Hindi so that people here in the north can read those stories. Okay, so for exchange of literature, not just literature, here he's saying scientific, medical, legal, commercial, cultural, for all kind of these exchanges, translation has become very, very significant. Now, to begin with, of course, I'm using Ghanshyam Sharma. I'll be using several books, maybe 2-3 books. I will keep telling you. Now, there are certain definitions which are there. I will read a few, rest you can see for yourself. Oxford University defines translation as the process of translating words or text from one language to another. So, what is translation? Translation is translating words or text from one language to another. That is translation, according to Oxford University. Then Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary defines translation as the process of changing something that is written or spoken into another language. Longman Dictionary defines word translate as changing written or spoken words into another language. Translation as the process of changing something into a different form. At the beginning of the scientific study of translation, अब कुछ writers आएंगे जो translation से जुड़े हुए हैं, and सबसे पहले and the most important one is Catford. He is involved in scientific study of translation. Catford. Catford described translation as the replacement of textual material in one language by the equivalent textual material in another language. So what is he talking about? The textual material. From one, I will use L for language, one language into another language. Okay, textual material. Then there are other writers also. Now, important one which I'll read is Suzanne Basnet, another name, important name as far as translation is concerned. Suzanne Basnet. It is double S-N-E-E-T. What is generally understood as translation involves rendering of source language text into target language so as to ensure the surface meaning of the two will be approximately similar, right? And second thing, she says, the structure of the SL, that is source language, will be preserved as closely as possible, but not so closely that the TL structures will be seriously distorted. Now, Suzanne Basnet का जो definition है ना, that is what is mostly used. And what is that? हम कर क्या रहे हैं? हम क्या कर रहे हैं? We are, she says, we are changing source language, which she calls SL, we are changing it into target language when we are translating. That is your TL. और दो बातें ध्यान रखने को, what she's saying, she says surface meaning will remain almost similar. The meaning, she says, will be similar, okay? And the structures of the source language will be preserved as closely as possible, but not so closely that the structures of target language are distorted. मतलब फिर target language में अगर समझ ही नहीं आए, अगर आप बिल्कुल maintain करने की कोशिश करोगे, then that is of no use. It has to be preserved, but not that much. Okay. Then there is DJ Rosany की definition है, and this is followed by Lawrence Venuti. Venuti is again popular name. Says that translation is a process by which the chain of signifiers that constitutes the source language text is replaced by the chain of signifiers in the target language. जैसे कि कैटफोर्ड बात कर रहे थे textual material की, he is talking about signifiers, and he says they remain the same that are there in the source language when it is changed into target language. Okay. Now, in other words, translation is the business of carrying across a message or written content from one text to another, from one person to another, from one language to a different language. One language आपकी source language, different language आपकी target language. It is best seen as a communication process where the transfer from one language into a new language, one language, this is the new language, target language, that takes place. And in the concluding lines of the definition portion that is in this book, it says translation, ये आपको ध्यान रखना है, translation is the communication of the meaning of a text in source language into a comprehensive which is understandable and which is in depth, comprehensive version of target language without causing any loss to the original message. This is what is the larger sense, the larger picture of translation given to us. हम क्या कर रहे हैं? We are translating source language into target language, but what we have to do, there should be no loss of original message. और ये original message वही है जो मैंने आपको बताया कि जो context है, जो भाव है, that needs to be maintained in the target language too. Okay, that is what translation is all about, and why it is done. Here he has given you the purpose and significance of translation. Translation, he says, expands our ability to explore through literature the thoughts and feelings of people people from another society or another time. This I told you. Okay? It permits us to savor, that is taste basically, here it means to read, the transformation of the foreign into the familiar, and for a brief time to live outside our own skins, our own preconceptions and misconceptions. I don't know इस book में है या कहाँ पे reference है. Paulo Coelho, I hope you must have heard his name. He has written The Alchemist, and he is which writer? Not Norwegian, but of course I got it here only. He is a Brazilian, yes, Brazilian writer, and this particular work, Alchemist, it has been translated into 80 languages, and this is in the Guinness Book of World Record of translation. Okay, now if it is not translated, how can you read about Paulo Coelho or any writer in the world for that matter? Okay, so translation has now become of great significance. It expands and deepens our world, our consciousness in countless and indescribable ways. The very concept of world literature as a discipline fit for academic study depends upon the availability of translations. There are many writers, Oren Pamuk की हम बात करें या हम ऐसे writers की बात करें who are writing in their own language. Paulo Coelho is writing, is a Brazilian writer. If we talk about Oren Pamuk, I'm forgetting what nation he belongs to, but he's writing in his language and it is being translated. Okay, Rabindranath Tagore followed translation when he lived. He translated his own works from Bengali into Hindi, Hindi into English. So translation has lived since ages, and translation is one way through which literature can travel. Literature can go from person to person. Translation, therefore, occupies a central and prominent position in the conceptualization of a universal enlightened civilization, and it almost defines the European Renaissance. Renaissance is rebirth. The rebirth we all have studied at one time or another began as the translation into Latin and then vernacular languages of the ancient Greek philosophy. हमने Wordsworth का पढ़ा है. He is, जितने भी romantic writers हैं, of romantic writers कौन से हुए? 18th century writers. They were all influenced by Greek writers. So Greek writers wrote in their language and their work was translated, and then these people read them. Wordsworth read about whosoever Greek writer he was impressed by. And science had been lost to Christian Europe for centuries. Poets of late 15th, 16th and 17th centuries, for example, Spaniards de la Vega and Franz de Leon, routinely translated and adapted classical and Italian works, and these versions of Horace or Virgil or Petrarch were included as a matter of course in collections of their original poems. So most of the important works in literature have been translated and made available to the public for reading, for understanding and for knowledge. Now as far as your first unit is concerned, this book has an old one. First unit deals with meaning of translation, definition of translation, and the second part is what is the importance or significance of translation. Today I have introduced the course to you, and I have also slightly touched upon significance as far as literature is concerned. But now in the next lecture we will talk about how translation is significant not just for literature but other areas like commerce, business, news, media and science and various areas of study. Okay, so we shall continue with the first unit. That is all for the introduction part, that basically what translation is and what are the definitions of translation. What you have to remember, SL, TL. And when SL is translated into TL, what has to be maintained? There should be no loss of meaning. Okay? That is all. Thank you so much. Take care.